Welcome to the Super Gamer Podcast. Welcome to the new Super Gamer Podcast, episode 185. Our guest this week is a writer, performance poet, ttrpg designer, podcaster, former poetry editor for Faya magazine, contributor to the Ultimate Micro RPG book. We have Brandon O'Brien. Thank you for being here.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So let's start with a bit of a silly one off the hop here, but on Patreon, people can pay to have you tweet out anything within reason. What's the wildest thing you've tweeted through that?
So that's the thing, right? The very surprising thing is very few people have ever taken me up on that, and I'm actually very disappointed. 'Cause, I want someone to, get me to embarrass myself, and no one does it. I think I've only tweeted twice for folks at that tier, and both of them were just I have a short story coming out in a magazine. Can you please promote the thing? I was like, I was gonna do this for you for free because the story is good. Can you ask me to do something else? And then they never responded again. So hopefully at some point in the future, I want to make a bigger deal about that for new subs. My Patreon hasn't grown that much yet, but if anyone is willing for $4, I will say anything embarrassing up to 280 characters on Twitter.
All right. Hopefully somebody hears it and takes you up on that.
Yeah.
So you got accepted to the 2024 Tin House Winter Online Workshop. What's most exciting about that for you?
I think it's just the fact that I haven't been in a space surrounded by creative peers working on things in quite some time. Workshopping used to be a big part of my poetry experience when I was very, very young. It was very good and refreshing to be in a room full of other poets, reading work, discussing each other's work, helping each other grow. And I kind of missed that. And I'm very excited for the possibility for that to actually get me to finish a novel at some point. But also, it's just... if you are in the literary community, there is a heavy discussion about how workshops work and whether they're actually beneficial and if they actually serve communities ideally. And in my own experience has always been, when you're with people who all know what the goal is, that's supposed to work. And I mean, there's also a matter of, are the processes genuinely healthy and respectful? And I think that, based on what I've seen so far, Tin House is working very hard to create a space that is very inclusive and very respectful. So I'm hoping to actually get into the workshop and see what that looks like, because that process won't start until February 2024. But I'm excited to just be surrounded by other people and surrounded by other people's work and finding the things that are good in those people's work and hoping that they can help me polish my own work in that exact same way. People underestimate how social writing is. There is this public perception that the creative industries, and especially writing, are primarily solitary, and they're not. And I kind of want to get back to the social aspect of being in other people's space, discussing work widely, and getting to the meat of what other people's work can do.
Yeah, as far as you mentioned, hopefully you're writing a novel. I mean, you write all sorts of stuff. We said games, poetry, you've got flash fiction, nonfiction. And in your poem, Time and Time Again, in Uncanny Magazine, issue 15. I love that one. That one really stood out for me. It's a beautiful story of losing a loved one and the grief around that. And I know this is in no way the point of the poem, but something that stood out to me is when you describe being in another universe and taking that version of you, their place, to be with your loved one again. And the reason it stood out is when it comes up in media, this concept, for some reason I'm always honed in on, in Into the Spider-Verse, for example, Kingpin, his whole motivation is he wants to bring his family from another reality into his world because he lost his family. My question for you, is an alternate reality version of the person you love still the person you love?
See, that's the thing, right? Because it's very interesting that you say you think that's not where that poem is coming from. That is very much where that poem is
Oh,
coming from.
okay.
Very literally the idea of um existing in this state of grief and then discovering that maybe there is a condition under which you can get this person that you have lost back into your life physically again, and whether you'd still endure that. And in that particular poem's case, a part of that narrative is also the fact that at the end of every other day, that stops happening. You are back in your loneliness, in your grief. But this time you know that at some point in the future you can get them back again, and whether you'd be able to navigate that kind of grief knowing that you will still have that kind of hope in the future, and whether that makes the grief bigger or the hope bigger, and the idea that it makes the hope bigger because it means you have never lost this person. And I do think like part of the drama of asking yourself that question is the answer kind of doesn't matter. It's how you feel about seeking the answer that matters. It's very much like, and this is obviously the point of the metaphor in the movie Inception, but it's a very good metaphor, so I'm going to use it. It's like the fact that at the end of the movie, when Cobb turns his totem, the movie stops before we can see whether it falls or not, because it doesn't matter to him whether he's in a dream. What matters to him is that he has his family. And I do think that for most people, I think, if I'm perfectly honest, even for me, even if I knew better, there would be a part of me, there's a part of everyone that would go, if I get to have this thing, and this thing is as real as it can ever be, then it is just as real as if it weren't a dream or a memory or me going back in time or me going to an alternate universe. Because what matters is that I am happy. That's why we do the things that we do. And I don't think we can judge anyone for wanting that, even if they know better. Because sometimes not having that happiness is disastrous for us in a way that, unless you know a very good therapist who can work in 1 or 2 sessions, that's the kind of thing that we need in order to go on. And I guess that poem is kind of about describing that kind of energy. How do you respond to that feeling of knowing that this thing is strange and not supposed to be happening, and you know that this person is gone, but at least just for you, they're never gone, no matter how weird that might be.
There's a part of me, I think, that would nag, like, I would feel simultaneously, well, if I'm willing to love this version, like, I'm betraying the real version. But then on the other side of that is I love them so much that I'll take what I can get, right?
Yeah, right? And, like, I guess, like, one of the things in alternate universe fiction that I think about a lot is, in that universe, there are rules that we don't necessarily know. Like, everything is always playing out in ways that we can't possibly fathom. And I'm thinking about this in part because, interestingly enough, the novel that I'm working on for the Tin House Workshop is actually a time travel alternate universe story that is much darker and like more influenced by trauma rather than pursuing some of the light and more curious aspects of those kinds of narratives. And one of the things that I was thinking of when I was outlining the novel is, if you go to another universe, what are you robbing the you in that universe of, if you don't know what they have? Like, if you do take your loved one from this universe, what is the suffering that you have left you in that universe to experience without them? What do they lack now? What will they never learn or gain or know how to use now that you've taken it from them? And um, how would you reckon with the idea that you doing that will have repercussions for you in your universe as well that you will never know? Like, what is it that you're supposed to experience that you've just denied yourself the experience of because you went back here? And I do like, I think those questions are just so meaty. Like, they're more interesting to me, um, in terms of questioning how we change our own experiences and the experiences of others, in that sense, than some other questions that we ask about time travel stuff. Like, it's cool to go, what if you killed this dictator in this past lifetime? But one of the things that I think would be far more interesting is, what if every person who has ever gone back in time to kill Hitler instead was given the mandate, why don't you get Hitler a hobby? Like there's this big, and I it's it's inherently problematic to even consider the possibility. But what would the universe look like, um, if instead of wanting things or destroying things, we were willing to pursue the versions of alternate universes where we were willing to ask those small questions about how people's lives changed and pursued them to their fullest extent and consider what would change for the better or the worse about our real world as a result. Because the fact of the matter is, there are versions of that universe where even the cruelest dictator, when you give them something beautiful to think of, they will see that beautiful thing as proof of their power rather than proof of goodness. And then you just made that guy worse. And you'll never know, but are you willing to ask that question? And are you willing to think very deeply about all of the things that might come from it?
So you've done flash fiction for major brands like Starfinder, Pathfinder, Magic the Gathering, and I've had a guest on before who also did sort of branded fiction, and I'm wondering, I asked similar questions of them. I'm wondering how much of that is assigned. Like, do you get to pick that you're writing about Quinn for Pathfinder, or do they come to you like, hey, we want a story for Quinn?
So if I recall correctly, the Quinn story, they did pitch that to me. They were like, we wanted to do iconic encounters. We need a Quinn encounter. Can you do a Quinn encounter? And I was like, yes, this is rad. Which is interesting to me because I was aware of but hadn't played Pathfinder yet. And of course, the iconic encounters series of flash fiction came just before they put out the advanced players guide. So I was like, I think it's really cool that there's this like fully Sherlock Holmesian detective in this universe using like immense powers of deduction to like solve what should otherwise be problems beyond our mortal imagining. I really want to write a thing about this. And they were like, okay, cool. Just here's some stuff about Quinn. Here's some stuff about the investigator role in Pathfinder. Just read those things and imagine a circumstance. Like all of the like other plot things are more or less yours. It just needs to be true to the mechanics. You can't have him do things that he cannot do in the game. And the image that is in the flash fic, they were like, this is the image that we're going to use for the flash fic. You can draw on it and all of the stuff that is influenced by it as much as possible. And they gave me those stuff to read as well. And I was like, this is cool. I don't need to make up much more than this. They just need they're essentially hiring someone to make the words happen. Like they already know, for the most part, what the meat of that action is, and they don't really need to tell me any of those things either. They know what the source of conflict is, etc. They just need someone to actually manifest it into a story, and that's very exciting for me as well. Interestingly enough, though, the experience for Magic was somewhat different, like largely different. Um, because when when they messaged me about writing for Zendikar Rising, they knew large parts of the world. They knew that uh they wanted stories to make room for discovering some of the new stuff that had been revealed about Zendikar. So the story had to include some part of that, but they were more or less eager to discover what people thought would be ways that that would be uh, possible in this story. And I immediately went, Zendikar is one of my favorite planes in Magic. There is a character here who I absolutely positively want to do a thing with. And that's how that story manifested. That it was less about, for me, it was less about fulfilling Wizards' goals of making sure that we describe the skyclaves and how we get there and what you can find within them, and more about Anawan hasn't had a story in ages and has been having a hard time for years. No one likes him. Everyone's trying to kill him. Can I redeem this guy? Can I turn Anawan into like a scholarly dork again instead of an evil vampire? And I was like, yeah, sure. And like they asked me no questions about it. There was no, like, people think that working on some level with IP is a lot of meddling, because we hear a lot of stories about executive level meddling and all in bigger kinds of IP projects. But at least for this, and probably because I wasn't doing like the major story for Zendikar Rising, where they probably had a great deal stricter goals, it was very much, we wanted to see the kind of story that you would write given all of these other narrative constraints. And I immediately knew what that goal was, knew what I was interested in, and just kind of fulfilled that as deeply as possible. And the only times they came back to me were deadline stuff, or making sure that I knew what was happening in the images that they sent me. So I didn't like accidentally give someone a tentacle where that was just a worm that was crawling on their back, which was a thing that happened in that first draft of that story. It's like, cool, grand. I like working like that is actually very inspiring, knowing that the people who own the IP still trust you as a storyteller is actually really inspiring in that workspace. And I'd very much like to do it again, especially for Wizards, because Magic is a big part, a big thing that I enjoy, and I'd like very much to do that again.
Right, you basically answered. I was going to ask, Magic in particular is such a vast universe that, like, how do you even begin to research a project like that? But it sounds like you already knew all about it.
Oh no, like, Magic was very brief. I mean, it still is a very big part of my nerd experience. But when I was very young, it kind of it was like the only hobby I had, which is also very weird because I couldn't very much afford it myself. So I would like watch other people play, or I had a couple of decks that people kind of handed it down to me, but it consumed me narratively for a long time, because I thought like the world building they were doing was actually very, very cool. Like, I got back into Magic around the reveal of the Innistrad plane, and immediately got sucked all the way back in. So now that they're doing web fiction again, I'm just very excited to constantly just be reading it again and being immersed in narrative in that sense, because in a lot of ways, for me, and I imagine a lot of other people, it is sometimes the only way you get to experience Magic, because you can't always justify buying cards if you're the only person that you know that plays it, or if the local game store that you would frequent is miles away from you, or you don't have one. Sometimes the narrative is the most engaging way to be a part of the community still.
Yeah, when I was in high school, I think that's when I started. All of my friends and I, we got really into Magic, and it was right around, I don't know what world it was, but like artifacts were a big thing, like living artifacts.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a blue deck because I just loved annoying people with like counter that, discard that. And then years passed, we kind of fell out of it. And now I really regret I sold those cards. And of course, now it's come back. All my friends are playing again, and I don't have any cards.
Yeah. It's a hell of a thing. Like the big thing for me, like one of the few things I talk about a lot, but like it's not like a big thing because a lot of other people have better, richer experiences actually getting to play Magic. But there is only one, as far as I know, only one local game store where I live in Trinidad and Tobago, and it is like 4 miles away from me, and is not available by public transport. So the only times that I've gone there are because a friend was like, they're doing an FNM. I will come and pick you up in the early morning so we can get there before the shop opens. I'm like, homie, this is a lot of energy for some people. But like, I cherish all of the ways that I can engage with Magic precisely because it is so weirdly difficult for me, and I still appreciate it. And one of the things that I kind of want very badly for Magic to have in the future is for it to become more accessible in that sense, which is a weird thing to say about such a large brand, but for more people to have an opportunity to enter tournaments, or for Friday Night Magic to not be tied to a physical location and give more community-based kind of grassroots communities the opportunity to take hold of some of that without having to be beholden to the shop where you can buy the cards, would be very good. And in lieu of that, I just kind of really enjoy just sitting in front of my computer and reading what these characters have been doing while I was gone.
I know you've said that historically you are bad at Yu-Gi-Oh! Are you good at Magic?
I am bad at Magic. But the thing is, when I say I'm bad at Yu-Gi-Oh, what I mean is I know how Magic works. Every once in a while, I will see a new thing happen in Yu-Gi-Oh and have no idea why it's happening. I have been, so I watched the Yu-Gi-Oh anime, Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5, the anime that revealed the Pendulum Summons. And thoroughly enjoyed the anime, and the entire time I was watching the anime I was like, that's gonna happen in the game and no one's going to enjoy it. It's gonna be wild, but no one's gonna enjoy it. And so said, so done. Pendulum Summons perhaps one of the most controversial things to happen to the main game, and then Konami decided, you know what's gonna solve the Yu-Gi-Oh problem? Let's make a smaller, quicker version of Yu-Gi-Oh that just obeys all of the core rules. There's a version of Yu-Gi-Oh that obeys the core rules. It's called Yu-Gi-Oh. And I feel like, and this is not me mocking it, obviously, I feel like there is a level of, I feel like the way that both of these games imagine complexity is totally different, where Yu-Gi-Oh's complexity is inherently in the text of each individual card, where you look at a card and you know this card does various cool and complicated things, and any one of those cool and complicated things can interact with any number of cards in complicated ways. But part of the puzzle of making a Yu-Gi-Oh deck is making that card do everything that it says it's going to do. Whereas Magic, the complexity is always in the interaction between individual cards, such that when a Magic player sees an individual card, they already know the engine that is made of that card and dozens of other cards like it or that will play off of its effects much more easily and much more closely than I think a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh is built and designed to be played as. And I think both of those things are very valuable, but I like the way that you put things together in Magic, and I want to be better at doing that.
I've never played Yu-Gi-Oh, but you have intrigued me.
I mean, Yu-Gi-Oh is still very fun, and it's a lot faster, I think, than Magic is. It's been a while since I've played, but off of muscle memory, I feel like when you know what you're doing in Yu-Gi-Oh, and I guess that's the weird thing too. When you know what you're doing in Yu-Gi-Oh, it plays a lot faster, and when you don't, it plays a lot slower because you're reading a lot more text in Yu-Gi-Oh than you ever will in Magic.
One of the podcasts you were on, Speculate, you record yourselves playing various TTRPG games. It's improv, it's role play. And I remember from my brief stint in high school improv, I was told, don't try to be funny, just try to advance the story. The funny will come, and forced funny isn't funny. Does that hold true for what you're doing? And do you think that the fact that you are recording and playing to an audience, does that change how you play the game?
Well, first, I do think playing for an audience does change that somewhat. Very much so, because obviously the tone of a home game is you're just trying to please the players at your table. But when you're making quote unquote content, when you're making media first for an audience to consume, that audience's reaction to the work is also important. So you can't just play the game that your table is comfortable playing and not consider like how the narrative develops in a unique and organic way, or whether individual beats are as entertaining as possible. In part because you can't ask your players to play up to those things because the dice will decide what it wants to do. But also because again, you're making a piece of media. Like, its goal is to be entertaining. But I do think that ultimately that thing is still true. And the good thing about Speculate, the part that makes Speculate easy is, Speculate as a podcast has like the built-in premise that all of our players and all of our GMs are writing professionals. They're novelists, they're publishers, they're editors, people who are in the industry, people who know how stories work. And the inherent assumption that we're making when we play is we know how stories work so well that if you put four or five of us together and just ask us to tell a story, we will, and it will be engaging. And that's kind of borne out as well. And I guess one of the things that, like, the parallel to me of that kind of advice is, I like, especially GMing a series of RPG play where some level of surrealism is taking place, where things are weird and off kilter. I've described it to my co-hosts as we always turn left at Twin Peaks. And that is the thing that engages me very much as a writer and as a GM. But you also can't force that. You can't just put weird things in situations for weird things' sake, because the narrative still has to pay off. You still have to fulfill characters' desires and obligations. You still need to put them in situations where that character feels challenged and that player feels like they're fulfilling a challenge that they're really interested in. So like, rain can't start falling upwards just because there is no action in the scene. You need to know how things are narratively connecting in that way. And what I've learned as a result is what makes a thing truly engaging in that weird sense is not when lots of weird stuff is happening. Is that when you set up a world where weird things can happen, the weird thing happens precisely at the moment when the stakes are either already very high or so low that introducing something weird will suddenly ramp up the stakes in a way that is emotionally fulfilling. And like, I try to be as restrained as possible because sometimes it's just like weird stuff happening. But I try to be as aware as possible of what this character needs and what the player needs to feel like they're generating the energy that they want in that scene, because I've had a lot of experience being around people in theater that I know that performing to a Zoom call is not the same as performing on stage, and finding ways to generate energy as a performance is separate from relying on the energy of the audience, knowing that they're feeding back to you. So I'm always tiptoeing around all of those things as carefully as possible, but I've discovered that moderation is the key to maintaining them.
Cool. So speaking of TTRPGs, or games anyway, on your itch.io, you've self-published, I want to say 15 games at this point.
Is it really that much? Jeez.
I think it's 15 with a 16th, Hero Revolution, I believe is on the horizon.
Yes, it's coming soon.
It had its first playtest at Big Bad Con. First off, you compare it to Kamen Rider, which I am unfamiliar with, but it does sound similar to me, like a Power Rangers or Reboot, like in the sort of like you're a regular person, but then through a transformation you're a superhero kind of deal.
I like, personally, as an aside, so I'm a big fan of Kamen Rider. Anybody who knows me knows that this is a big part of my brain. I literally co-host a podcast about Kamen Rider with a writer friend of mine named Diori Kisano. The name of the podcast is Righteous Kicks. It always flatters me, first and foremost, when people's first touchstone for Kamen Rider's Power Rangers. Other Kamen Rider nerds would be very mad at you, but they're obviously in the same family. They were originally created by the same writer, Shotaro Shinomori, who, if you aren't aware, is the mangaka who is responsible for Cyborg 009. So I like, one of the reasons why I'm always very pleased when people are like, well, I still know what this is because I know Power Rangers, is because there is like a depth of engagement in Kamen Rider in particular, which is like a touch darker than Power Rangers or Super Sentai typically are. Typically a great deal more individualistic and plays more to the relationships individual characters have with their powers, rather than a small group of people and their relationship as a group. So all of those things are things that I'm hoping to like pay off in the game. But yeah, I just like, the Hero Revolution is still very much in process. That Big Bad Con playtest did reveal a great deal about how I want the game to work. But one of the things that I think it did reveal as well is, one of the things that I dig a lot about Kamen Rider as a show is, even when there are multiple transforming heroes in that show, it is never about what are we all going to do together to resolve this problem. It's always, what are our individual relationships to this problem and to the power that we have, and how do we reconcile those things in groups of 2 or 3, and how does that reconciliation confirm our shared beliefs as a group, rather than the Power Rangers sense of someone has already confirmed what our values are and we are just here to perform to those values, which is, again, not a knock to Power Rangers, but there are two very different kind of heroic dynamics, and I'm trying to play specifically to a kind of energy in Kamen Rider in that sense.
I think that's an interesting thing to keep front of mind, because the only TTRPG that I am familiar with and play is Dungeons and Dragons, and my GM is awesome, great writer, brilliant at running a game, but I do find and this is probably more on the players, but we do have that problem of, like, at some point we just sort of need to pretend that it's like, oh, well, of course we're all going to go fight this together, when our individual motives might not aligned with that.
Yeah, like, and again, Dungeons and Dragons is a very good game, and it's not like inflexible in this sense, that it's impossible for someone to tell more individualistic stories with Dungeons and Dragons, because obviously it comes down to what do your players want, and how can your GM perform those things for you. But it's always so very interesting to me, that sense of you are a party and therefore your goals must necessarily be aligned, which is rarely, if ever, true of most fiction in general. Like, I always think about everyone, like, there is this like regular kind of joke in TTRPG communities that the obvious ways to start a D&D campaign are inherently difficult, because if you don't know each other, why are you here?
Right.
Like the whole you meet in a tavern.
Exactly.
Why are we all like, you're telling me that we're here by coincidence, which means that we can leave by coincidence.
Right.
And there are obviously like solutions to that problem as well, but I'm always more intrigued by the question of how does a group reconcile strongly differing personal opinions, and how does the GM tell a story that still gives everybody the ability to fulfill those narratives very deeply without essentially making a table that is playing against itself. And that's not hard, and I don't think it's hard in D&D either. I just think that D&D emphasizes narratively that its goal is you are working towards a shared journey, which is good. But I'm always fascinated by telling versions of that story where maybe the journey is in the same direction, and maybe even everybody is getting the exact same way, but they're getting the same way at different speeds or for different reasons. Maybe it's a race, maybe it's an ideological contest about who is right in this instance, and what decision to get to that end goal is more ideal than the other, or will just win regardless. And how do you empower people in TTRPGs in general to be able to perform that without feeling that at the end of the day that you have wanted to tell a kind of story and all of your players are walking over you instead. It's why I think I gravitate a great deal more to some other kinds of story games where obviously there is a group and obviously their goal is shared, but the entire drama of the play of the game is how do we reconcile our differences in order to get to this goal. I got into TTRPGs because I was lucky enough to be one of the first cohort for Avery Alder's Emerging Designers Workshop at the exact same time that she was working on Dream Askew and Dream Apart with Benjamin Rosenbaum. And one of the things that I adore about that system for those games is you are defined as a community first and foremost. In Dream Askew, in Dream Askew and Dream Apart, you are a member of a community that is attempting to survive hostile circumstances coming at you from all around, and each of you is still an individual person making individual decisions shaped by your own experiences, your own traumas, your own goals. And even if all of you still want the community to succeed, you all think about that success in different ways and will inevitably clash. And the story is, well, we know that you're going to clash. How does the community still succeed after you're clashing? And I want to tell more stories like that. I want to be more engaged in that mode. And I do feel that even though Hero Revolution is very much not like that, it is drawing specifically from series in the Kamen Rider franchise where the multiple protagonists in that show are all people with completely different goals and completely different motivations and can still look at a bad guy at the end of the day and go, you are a bad guy. It doesn't matter why I'm defeating you. What matters is that you must be defeated. And I kind of want to play with that as much as possible in that.
What about, you have an interesting dice roll mechanic as far as the risk system in the game. Do you consider dice rolling a part of the storytelling, like how you do the dice rolling? Like, why not just go with the D20 style and be done with it?
Well, first, it's because the D20, in my opinion, is the least intriguing die physically. Like, I think a lot, like, a part of me is driven to dice. Like, if you are big in ttrpgs, there comes a point where the hand feel of dice is intriguing and engaging all on its own, and especially if you're on the autism spectrum, I also imagine that the tactility of certain kinds of dice also all immediately very engaging. So I think a lot about not just how holding dice is supposed to be a very stimulating and engaging act in itself, and how do you give people as often as possible moments where they're just kind of fiddling with something because they know that it's gearing up to something, that holding dice in your hand is an act of anticipation towards a future act. Every time you roll a die in an RPG, the moment before it settles is the moment in an action thriller movie where the camera starts slowly zooming in on the bomb that has 10 seconds left, and your result is whether that bomb's gonna go off or not. And I always want to create an experience where just before the die settles, there is a moment where that story can still change again. And one of the reasons why I was like tinkering with what eventually became the risk system in this game is because I wanted to create what I hope is a circumstance where a player is hoping for a good outcome, gets half of a good outcome, and goes, wait, there is more that I can do here, so I'm gonna keep doing it, and hoping that things still change. That is the experience of the timer going from 10 seconds to 9 seconds, and that's when the player decides, okay, I'm gonna snip a wire, I don't care which wire it is, and the wire that they snip is gonna decide whether the bomb starts ticking faster or stops. And I think that it's there. The experience that we had in the playtest was like very inspired about the dice itself, and I'm very hopeful that with a couple more touches, the act of rolling dice in the game will be one of the more stimulating parts of playing Hero Revolution. And the system, I'm working on this system more broadly for some other games as well, so I'm hoping that it keeps that energy for some other kinds of narratives as well.
Last question on Hero Revolution. I know that is, or at least was, a working title. Have you settled on it? And can you tell us any other titles that you considered?
It was very briefly Hero Spark. And I'm not motivated by that at all. And I don't think it's going to remain Hero Revolution, sadly. Although I really do like Hero Revolution. I have no idea what it's going to be. I feel like when I get closer to the end, that the name will call to me, much like everything else I've ever written. But at this point, I am not... Like, obviously the name's goal is to draw people to the thing, but I'm not so terribly frightened that I'm not going to discover what that thing is that will draw people to the game, because I think that the game speaks for itself, or will speak for itself when it's done. So I'm gonna let my muse come to me when they're ready and let me know what the name is supposed to be. I'm just making sure that the game exists first.
Possessed by Verse, another game of yours. I love the concept. I love, I don't know if you've ever played Madverse City in the Jackbox series.
I haven't played it, but I've seen it. It's very, because I wasn't really thinking about it at that point in time, but Madversity is obviously one of the touchstones that I have in mind, because I'm always thinking about how do you inspire people who do not think that they can write poetry to write poetry. And one of the things that I enjoy about Madversity is obviously people who don't think they can rap are now unburdened with the task of actually spitting the verse themselves. They just need to write it, and they will be given a prompt, and you will be amazed at how people who do not think that they are inherently poetic will write some of the coolest things that you've ever discovered.
Totally.
And then you'll go back to them and like, but I didn't use the prompt that Jackbox gave me. That was all me. It's like, so you're saying that you can write rap then? You're saying that you can write hip hop, that you don't need any guidance. And that was like, as a poet, as the poetry facilitator who has like worked with young people in particular, I'm always thinking of ways to encourage people who don't think that they can write poetry to feel unburdened by the desire to be good or to be perfect, and just do the thing. And Possessed by Verse is the business card version of how to compel people to do that. Like, how do you get people who are already willing to break the ice for any other kind of silly thing to break the ice by writing a poem and performing it at someone on the spot, surrounded by other people. And the only reason it disappoints me is every time I'm supposed to go somewhere, every time I'm supposed to leave for a convention, I'm like, I'm gonna print some of these. I'm gonna not forget to go to my itch page and re-download these images and print 100 of these cards, and I always forget.
Well, people should not forget to go to your itch page. It is the Rising Tithes, tithes.itch.io. They can also find you have a book of poetry, Can You Sign My Tentacle, which is at interstellarflightpress.com/canyoussign-my-tentacle.html. Anywhere else you want people to find you?
I have a website that is also my newsletter at brandonobrien.xyz. So if you want to hear me talk more about poetry, talk about what's happening in the world in ways that are stimulating and inspiring me, and sometimes see screenshots of whatever mobile game I'm playing at that point in time, you can definitely check out my newsletter at that website. And of course my Patreon, patreon.com/risingtides.
Brandon O'Brien, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This was fun.